Recordings, and we're going to broadcast some of our. Please note that it takes a moment for the public to connect with all these. It is. So we are broadcasting and just waiting for the attendees of the public to know that they are there. I see 0 attendees. Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and those in our audience, and all of those logging in for the Newburyport Zoning Board of Appeals, our first post-COVID hybrid, more in-person, less hybrid meeting. And so we're at the Newburyport Senior Center. It's now 7 p.m. and we're going to open and convene our public hearing for the Newburyport Zoning Board of Appeals, the meeting of July 26, 2022. Just in the way of some rules of the road and the way of some information so that folks understand how we're going to do our business this evening and going forward, how we'll aspire to do this business of the ZBA. Because we're now hybrid, we will continue to broadcast as best we can, barring any sort of technology glitch. We will broadcast through a system that's here at the Senior Center, as well as, of course, broadcast the old-fashioned way, right here in public out loud for those in the audience, if wish to attend in person. And so I'm going to take a moment and introduce myself. I'd like to also introduce 2 new members of our ZBA, as well as the rest of the ZBA and everyone that's sitting at tables this evening, so that anyone watching at home, as well as anyone in the room, will understand who exactly is here on the dais, as they say, and you can understand who makes up the ZBA, of course, how this will flow. I also like to just go through a lay of the land of process. The Zoning Board of Appeals is of course, a citizen appointed board. We do operate under a Robert's Rules of Order, though it is slightly modified for ease and simplicity, but we will run in that format. I'll get into that flow very quickly and give everyone a quick lay of the land of the segments of every evening, how it will go. Then we'll get into the business of calling the roll, establishing that we have a quorum, which is a legal number sufficient to conduct the legal business of the board. And then we will get into our public hearings and I'll explain that. So to begin with, my name is Rob Champetti. I'm the chair of the Zoning Board of Appeals. I'll introduce the board. Starting to my far left, we have Gregory Bennick, member of the CBA, Bud Shannon, member. One of our 2 newest associate members, Patricia Peckman, Lynn Shaw, also a member. And we also have Ken Swanton to my left, vice chair. And to my right, we have Andy Port, our city's planning director. To his right, Mr. Stephen Delisle, zoning board member. And finally, Ms. Gretchen Joy, our tireless keeper of the record. And so out of courtesy to Gretchen, who has the unenviable task of having to write down everything we all say, if when we get to public comment, if you wish to speak, and this is for those in the room, we just ask that you kindly give your name and address at first, so that Ms. Joy can record it and we can have an accurate set of minutes. So having called the roll, having just established the intros, I'm going to quickly call the roll, which may seem redundant, but we'll just go through that process. And once we establish a quorum, we'll get into our annual election of officers. That will be a quick matter. And we will then get into our public hearing. So calling the roll, we'll ask the Zoning Board of Appeals members, as I call your name, please just respond with either aye or here. Mr. Beck. Here. Mr. Chen. Here. Ms. Peck. Here. Ms. Chow. Here. Mr. Swanton. Here. Mr. Delisle. Here. And Rob Champetti, I'm here. That's 6 present. 1, 2, 3, 4. Wait a minute. Am I counting correctly? There's 7. My apologies. Lawyers are famous. So we have 7. We have more than a quorum. Just to give you a lay of this land, with ZBA, it is required that we have at least a 4-member board in order to conduct business as zoning board. And in a 4-member board, if we were to have that, that would be a minimum board, which means that the board must vote in unanimity, which is essentially a unanimous vote. In order for an application to be successful, it must receive at least 4 yes votes. If it's a 4-member board, which is the minimum, every member would have to vote yes. So I will also establish for the record our voting members this evening. We have to establish the 5 voting members. The other members who aren't voted will participate in deliberations and questions. They just simply don't vote. Our voting members will be Mr. Bennick, Mr. Shannon, Mr. Swanton, myself, and Mr. Delisle. Our non-voting members this evening will be Ms. Pecknick and Ms. Shaw. And And am I saying your last name correctly?
Scout.
Scout, thank you. Thank you. Crazy, right? So I want to make sure I get that right. So we have a quorum and we can establish that we're going to conduct our business this evening of the ZBA. We first have on our agenda annual election of officers. This is where any member of the ZBA will, we have 3 offices in the zoning board we elect and vote every year. The offices are, of course, chair, vice chair, and secretary. And we just simply need a member, any member, to make a motion for a slate, for a differing slate, and then we will have a vote, and it'll be a just a yay or nay vote for a show of hands, and we will establish our next year's officers. Do we have a motion?
I'll make the motion to establish a new board for the coming year as Rob Champetti as chairman, Ken Swan as vice chairman, and Stephen Delisle as secretary.
Okay, we have a motion to establish the upcoming slate of officers. Rob Champetti, chair, Ken Swan, vice chair, Stephen Delisle, secretary. Do we have a second?
I'll second it, by Shagner.
Very good. Motion's made by Mr. Delisle and seconded by Mr. Shagnon. Calling the roll on the motion for the slate of officers. Mr. Bennett.
Yes.
Mr. Shagnon.
Yes.
Ms. Pecknick.
Yes.
Ms. Chow.
Yeah.
Scout.
Just no judge.
I won't live this down. Mr. Swan.
Yes.
Rob Champetti, yes. Mr. Delisle.
Yes.
Okay, we have 7 in the affirmative. The ayes have it. The motion carries. The slate of officers is adopted. So moving on, and thank you. And we will move on to public hearings. So we have 2 matters that are public hearings. And for those that are watching at home via Zoom, I have up on my screen the Zoom participant panel. With prior hearing formats, I would ask that anyone who wishes to speak to just raise your hand and we will recognize you when we get to public comment. I'm going to just go through quickly how we run the format of this meeting for those that might not be familiar. And I'll explain how we will do the hybrid version for those at home. I can see whose hand is raised, so I will see that your hand is raised and will recognize you and just ask you to give your name and address. So the way the public hearings will run, I will begin by reading the legal notice of each hearing in sequence based on the agenda, unless there's some request or prevailing reason or accommodation that that's been asked of us, in which case we could juggle the order. That's rare. Typically, we go in the sequence unless there's a reason not to. I'll read the public notice by reading the application as described, as well as the address, and then I will describe, just as the legal notice described for any butters or elsewhere in publication, the relief being sought by the applicant, whether it's a variance, a special permit for non-conformance, and then as further convenience, I'll always just read a natural language description. Applicant seeks all necessary permits to build a shed or to extend, a footprint or what have you. So this way, anyone who's listening doesn't need to have the actual agenda in front of them to know what's being asked and what's being considered. After I read the legal notice, I turn the floor over to the applicant or the applicant's representative, attorney, architect, engineer, all of the above, to present the application to the board. That is where any materials that we all of which are on the city's website, are available to be viewed at home. But rest assured, if you can't find it or have difficulty with that, Mr. Port, our planning director, will be putting them up on the Zoom screen. So you need only just look at anything being referenced or spoken of by anyone. We'll have the corresponding visual up for you to see. So that is true both here as well as at home. So just make reference to that when you're looking at anything. And once the applicant has completed the presentation, we'll close that portion of the public hearing and we'll go to public comment. Public comment is when Andy will put up a slide that just gives a quick rule of the road of public comment. And it simply says, he doesn't have to put that. It simply says that we try to govern ourselves to a courtesy of a 2-minute limit to public comment. That isn't to squelch anyone's comments or shorten anyone's commentary, but rather to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to speak and it's all a balanced opportunity throughout and across the board. So I give often wide discretion. I do, however, have the ability to as delicately and courteously as I can ask you to wrap things up. I will do that as delicately and courteously as I can, but I ask you to govern yourselves as you speak. Please just raise your hand if you're on Zoom. I'll recognize you by name. You will want to unmute your mic. We'll do the same here, and then you will have the floor, and I'll let you know that by name. Just give your name and address to Ms. Joy, and we'll hear from you. Once you finish, just kindly lower your hands so it doesn't appear as though you have another comment. I'll go through until there are no questions and hands, whether they're in the room live. If you're in the room, and this pertains to Madam Sir, you would take that podium that's right in front of you, bend the microphone down to suit you, and give your name and address, and we would certainly welcome your comments. Know that if you pose your comments in the form of a question, it's not discourtesy on our part intended anyway to be discourteous of not responding to your question. It's simply we will take in your commentary, even if it's in the form of a question, but know that while we won't address it as it comes, it is not us being, again, impolite, but rather we're taking it all in. We will surely hear some version, if not the exact version of your question, in the next section of the ZBA public hearing, which is questions from the board. This is when members of the board will have adapted or redacted or revised or added to whatever they've heard from public comment or their own questions. And almost exclusively, a question that's posed will be reposed to the appropriate party, applicant, engineer, etc. So please know that that is something that we pay attention to and be prepared for that. When you finish, you can just take your seat if you're here and just lower your hand if you're remote. We will then close that portion, public hearing, go into questions for the board. We ask questions one at a time. I'll call on each member to ask questions so we get through that. We'll close that portion of the public hearing, and then we go to deliberations. That's the final period of our hearing. Deliberations is when we think out loud, which is part of the Robert's Rules requirement of the public meeting laws. You will hear us deliberate everything that we've heard, everything that troubles us, everything that inspires us, all of that which lies in between. We may have additional questions, in which case we'll ask them, but we will get through deliberations. In the rare occasion, we may invite additional comments from the applicant. It may inspire additional questions from the public, though that's very rare. We try to close that in order. Once we get through deliberations, we will close that portion, the final portion of the public hearing, and that is when I will ask a member of the ZBA for a motion. Under Robert's Rules, the motion is always offered in the affirmative. Please understand that doesn't mean that the member is supporting the application or plans to vote in favor of it. It's simply a procedural mechanism by which we place that question on the floor for a vote. It's always made in the form of a motion to approve the application. That has no bearing on the vote of that moving party, that member, or anyone else. It's then seconded. Once the motion's made and seconded, I'll call the roll just like I did with our attendance. And we will require at least 4 in the affirmative for the motion to carry and the application to be approved. That's really it in a nutshell. And so I know that that is quite labored, but it's important for those that are watching to just know what to expect. So with that, we're going to go into our first public hearing. It is the matter of Waldorf Realty LLC, care of Lisa Mead, Teller and Costa LLC. This is the application and continuation from 6/28/22 of 200-208 Merrimack Street. The applicant is seeking all necessary permits for a variance to modify a 2011 variance by adding an additional fast food use at the rear of the structure, and also a special permit for nonconformities to remove a portion of a later added one-story rear addition and construct a new one-story structure in its place. I believe, Andy, we have a request from Attorney Mead on behalf of the applicant. Correct me if I'm wrong, the request essentially asks the board to consider a further continuance as the applicant is undertaking a detailed traffic study, much of which was inspired by our questions and our requests, and that is not yet complete. And there may be other things as well. And is that essentially, was there anything else?
Correct, until August 23rd.
August 23rd. So that is the request. I will, just in the interest of completeness, does anyone in the audience wish to be heard on request for continuance? Seeing no hands and head shaking no. I see no hands on Zoom. Do we have a motion to continue the application to August 23rd?
Chair, I will move to grant the motion requesting a continuance on this matter to the August 23rd meeting of the zoning.
Greg, I'm just going to say, when each of us, I should have said this, when each of us speaks, we're going to need to have the mic The mic broadcasts out loud and the owl system picks it up so that folks know. If you can just repeat.
Yes, I will move that the request for continuance for TNC 22-7 and DAR be granted and the matter be placed on the agenda for our August 23rd, 2020.
Very good. Motion's made. Do we have a second? I'll second it. Thank you. Motion's made by Mr. Bennett, seconded by Mr. Swanton on the motion to approve the continuance to the 23rd of August. Calling the roll. Mr. Bennett.
Yes.
Mr. Shin.
Yes.
Ms. Beckman.
Yeah.
Ms. Chad.
Yeah.
Mr. Swanton.
Yes.
Mr. Blat.
Yes.
Champetti, I vote yes. It's 70 affirmative. The ayes have it. Motion carries. That is continued to the 23rd. The only other remaining application, thank you for your patience if you are here for that. This is the application of David Nickerson, the applicant address 174 Water Street. This is a request for a special permit for nonconformities to replace the existing accessory structure with a new 8x10 accessory structure in a similar non-conforming location in the side/rear yard. May we hear from the applicant? Mr. Nickerson.
Hello, I'm Dave Nickerson from 174 Water Street. Thank you for the invitation to join me tonight. My wife Kelly and I moved into this home as of about September of last year. We're new to the city. We've not previously gone through the zoning board process, so hoping that this experience will be certainly a learning lesson to be going forward. I can say that the shed that is being highlighted here in the corner was removed from the property prior to my wife and I purchasing the property. However, it still is illustrated on the site plan for the property. Recognizing that we needed to have storage space for all of our outdoor products, outdoor materials and tools, my wife and I went ahead and purchased this shed, having it installed without previously seeking the board's input on this matter. What led us to that point is that we consulted with a number of individuals who we met, as I mentioned, very new to the city. We weren't familiar with the process, so we consulted with our neighbors. We consulted with others who we thought understood the expectations and the requirements for such a structure. Unfortunately, I think some of the guidance we received misled us. We accept full responsibility for that, and are here to explain the situation and seek whatever remediation might be most appropriate. Let's see. So as you can tell from the illustration on the screen, the lot is a pie-shaped lot with frontage along Water Street. Along the left side of the property, we border 148 Water Street. That's the Schwartzes who we did speak to prior to the installation of the shed. Along the right side of the property is the rail trail. There are a couple of properties that abutters who exist on the other side of the rail trail. However, we did not consult with them prior to installation. The old shed, as you may be able to see, at least from the overhead diagram, was essentially built into the space. Triangular shed, relatively large, 140 square feet. As I mentioned, it was removed from the property prior to our coming into play. We've replaced it with a smaller shed, an 8x10 shed in a location that approximates that of the original shed. As I mentioned, the original shed was built in somewhat of a triangular shape to sit into that back angular space of that pie-shaped lot. I could not locate a commercially available shed that would mimic that shape, and so it was led to do our best to purchase the typical rectangular shaped shed. As I mentioned, this is a small 8x10. I'll speak to the setbacks here while we have this visual up on the screen. I mentioned on the left side, we abut the houses at 148 Water Street. In the very rear corner of the shed, the setback from the fence that exists there is, which is about a 6-foot shed, setback there is only a couple of inches. That rose to about 2 feet at the front left-hand corner. On the right side of the shed, which I mentioned abuts the rail trail, the setbacks range from about 1 feet 8 inches, which allows room to get around to the backspace. It ranges up to about 4 feet 2 inches in the front right corner. The overall height of the shed, perhaps we go to the actual picture, the overall height of the shed is 11 feet. As I mentioned, the square footage of this shed is 80 square feet, 8 by 10. The approximate square footage from what I could gather by measuring out myself and where I visualized the old shed being comes to approximately 140 feet. So this new shed is 60 square feet smaller than the previous shed. I've gone through the setbacks. There is a significant increase in the setback at the rear of the shed. On the previous visual, it showed that the setback from the very top of the pie-shaped corner, it's hard to explain, was about 4 feet. That space is now at about 17 feet. I've gone through the setbacks on side A, the left, and side B, which is the right. Those setbacks, I have to point out, the minimum setbacks on both sides are somewhat smaller, than the setbacks of the original shed in that space. Again, most of that really is dependent upon the desire to put the shed in the original spot in order to conserve space in what is a very small lot, while also taking care to maximize the utility of the open space. Because the shed is smaller, it reduces the overall amount of the property that we are taking up by having a shed in this space. So from a size point of view, it's actually increasing the amount of open space that we have on the property. So I think closing statement would be, just I would like to acknowledge the non-conformities and the changes that have been made here, but I hope that you agree, given the irregularities in the property's shape and some of the difficulties in placing a commercially available shed in this space, that we've attempted to do the best we could, especially given that we have consulted with neighbors who directly abutted us to the left-hand portion of the property. And I'll add that one of the attachments within the application was a letter from Philip Schwartz, who I believe is online, who has acknowledged this conversation and acknowledged the acceptable position of the sheriff.
Good. Anything further before we close the presentation? Is there anything? Oh, sorry. I think this is.
Perhaps, yeah, I don't know if it's possible with the battery.
Sorry. Is this one working? This one's on too. Hey, we got a winner. Anything else before we close the presentation?
Nothing that's obvious to me.
No, that's not a trick question. I just wanted to make sure if there was anything else you wanted to do that. But okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right. So we will, at this point, having closed that portion of the public hearing, which is the presentation, the applicant, Mr. Nickerson, we are going to go to public comment. And again, and there's no one in the room, I will go to attendees. Anyone watching via Zoom, if you wish to speak or be heard in connection with this application, just kindly raise your hand. I'll see it and we will recognize you. I only see 4 people in the room, so I will see no hands, going once, going twice. Okay, we'll close that. Here it is. Philip Schwartz. Mr. Schwartz, you want to go ahead and unmute your mic on Zoom? We'll do the same, and you have the floor.
Hi. So as Dave mentioned, we abut their property. We're at 178 Water Street. Dave did approach us, I'd say a month or 2 before he and Kelly embarked on the project and asked us if we would be okay with the shed in the location that he shared with you, and we have no issues with it. And specifically, you know, and you guys know this, on old lots, often there's really not a whole lot of room to do anything as far as storage. So we completely understand where he was coming from, and from our perspective, we were fine with the project, and we still are.
All right, very good. Thank you, Mr. Schwartz. Anyone else wish to speak in connection with this application? Seeing no additional hands, I will close that portion of the public hearing. If we'll go to questions from the board, we'll begin on my left side, Mr. Bennett.
Just a few, welcome to Newburyport.
Oh, you can use the mic.
Welcome to Newburyport. I don't know if this one's working either. Is it working?
Go closer.
How about that?
Yeah, it's working.
Welcome to this. Just a couple of questions. How is it that you became aware of your obligation to be here tonight?
Sure, yeah, please.
Somebody knocked on my door.
I said, you know who that was?
No, I don't. I was working upstairs.
Okay.
My wife took the car, but I'm sorry.
Okay. Was it somebody city?
representing the zone board.
Okay. Yeah, someone. Yeah, thank you. One last question. Do you know the approximate height of the old shed?
I don't. And it was impossible to figure that out based on the pictures that we're seeing here.
Thank you. That's all I have.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bennett. Mr. Chairman.
I just had one question. Did you consider scooting the shed forward to get the 6-foot relief that's required?
If I were to, I did.
Okay, how far forward would it have to come? Is it crazy, like 12, 14 feet?
It would need to sit in the very center of the lot.
Okay. Peace, thank you. Good explanation.
Ms. Becker.
My question was answered that it was Mr. Freeman who put the shed down, the developer who was developing the property. It wasn't there.
It wasn't us, no, I believe it was the builder that we purchased from.
Oh, you want to just pass the, want to go that way? Yeah, sure. I mean, that's okay. to pass.
My only question was the height of the former shed, which.
I just was curious about roughly what year will check come down.
I don't know. I hate to do this, but my neighbor online probably has better answers for you than I do.
That's, I mean, when did you buy it?
September of last year.
Last year, okay. I have no other question. Okay, Mr. Goulet.
I don't have any questions. I think the board has asked me very many questions.
Thank you, Mr. Goulet. I don't have any questions either. Unless there's any further questions from the board, I'll close that portion of the public hearing. We will go into deliberations. Thank you. And again, keep in mind, we're deliberating the legal criteria that the applicant seeks, which is a special permit for non-conforming. So I will invite you to deliberate around that criteria, and we'll begin with Mr. Bennett.
Thank you. Well, it appears from the application and testimony, thanks to Nickerson, that the requirements to obtain the permit, special permit for non-conformities are met here. I note also that the abutting landlord, Mr. Schwartz, his wife had no objection. I typically take a Tim view of after the fact approvals. In this case, I think the explanation satisfies me in every respect that this was a good thing, oversight. And that being said, I would support the request.
Well, Mr. Chairman.
I have to agree with Mr. Beck. I think the criteria are met, and again, I believe it was a good faith effort when they put the new shed up. And I don't think it's any worse than the previous shed. You could argue it's better. And I do see with the shape of the lot, it would be difficult to scoot it forward enough to pick up the 6 foot. So I can support the application.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ms. Beckman.
The height and setback of buildings along the rail trail does make a difference in the public experience of the rail trail. So generally, the reason not to build within a 6 foot setback is that it feels intrusive on the abutting property. And here we know that it doesn't feel intrusive on 178 Water Street, according to Mr. Schwartz. Does it to the other abutter, which is the rail trail using public. So I'm thinking about the fact that the city invested considerable time and care into designing a public trail that moves through these densely populated neighborhoods, while maintaining the illusion that you're walking among trees and plantings and art. It's designed to feel more like walking in a park than like walking down the street. So in general, having structures with this shallow setback and that height makes it feel much more like you're walking through people's backyards. I do happen to remember the previous shed and recall that it was not so tall. I can't find other places on the rail trail where there's anything both this tall and this close. There is another shed on 178 Water, Mr. Schwartz's shed, but it was built, before our current zoning law. It's been there a long time. We know that the rail trail public has been actively interested in this project. I recall in the historical commission, there was feedback when the property was being developed. And I know the zoning administrator was sometimes involved. I also know the view from the rail trail has been important to this board on that exact stretch of the trail when this board has considered, for example, the view of the back of 12 Harrison from the rail trail when people were discussing the deck. So I suppose I would echo, I believe, Mr. Bennett, who asked, if there are alternatives, maybe Mr. Shannon, are there alternatives to the proposal, maybe moving it forward a few feet, perhaps closer to the 178 property line, since that abutter supports the change. I just happen to think it's a more sensitive case because it is on the rail trail. And I can imagine if there were buildings that close and that high all along that stretch, it would really change the public experience. So my concern would not prevent me from participating in a consensus to approve this, but I think it's important to have these concerns in the record.
Thank you, Ms. Beckman. Ms. Chapman.
Yeah, as someone in the city who does walk along this almost every day, I have to tell you, I've never noticed your shed. And looking at the picture, I think, as one of our colleagues just said, you did a very nice job choosing a shed that's in keeping with the character of the neighborhood. And I think that you should be commended for that. It's got all of the sort of cedar shapes that a lot of the properties have there. So I think that you made an effort to have it be nice and gotten your neighbor's permission. And while I think that the rail trail is an important amenity for people in the city, so is the use of one's property. to make you happy as the person who owns the property. So I would be in support of your petition.
Thank you, Mr. Swanton.
I just want to start by saying it's unfortunate, it's never good, when you come in after the fact and ask for approval for something that's already done. I understand it happens sometimes. And I thought you were pretty gracious about how you described it. Just never good, but nevertheless, this is a small building, and it's a replacement. I think this technically is the point about the unspoken about it here from the rail trail. But I do think the building is small. There already is a shed there. This building is actually smaller than that. Maybe a little taller, but it's small. It's a very regular lot. It's essentially replacing a building that wasn't taken down that long ago, and it does not introduce any new non-conformities. So I don't have an issue with it. I can support this proposal.
Thank you, Mr. Swanton, and Mr. Lau.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too can support the proposal. I agree that we don't want to have things intruding or lording over the rail trail, but I think that looking at the pictures here and walking down the rail trail, myself, this doesn't really do that for me. I didn't think it was that out of keeping with the rest of the area. So I really have no problems with this, and I can support this.
Thank you, Mr. Lau. Not to repeat everything else that my colleagues have said, I actually can support it. I feel it's a fair, balanced request. It's an unfortunate circumstance for as a board, both collectively as well as individually, paid quite a bit of attention to the sort of special resources such as the rail trail and sightlines there. Maybe not necessarily within our purview of permitting power. Yes, it's still within the purview of our interests, members of the community. I want to welcome you to Newburyport as well. It's quite a way to splash your way in, but welcome aboard. But I think that it's a fair request. It's not ideal, but I appreciate everything you've done to try to bring this balance to us, and I feel like it's supported along with, it sounds like, my colleagues. So unless there's anything further, we will close deliberations. And do we have a motion?
I'd like to make a motion to approve the special permit for non-conforming use application for 174 Water Street, number 22-19.
I'll second that, Mr. Blau.
Thank you, Mr. Swanton, seconded by Mr. Blau, calling the roll on the motion to approve. Mr. Bennett,
Yes.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
Mr. Swanton,
Yes.
Mr. Blau.
Yes.
Rob Champetti, I vote yes. That's 5 in the affirmative. The ayes have it. Motion carries. Congratulations. Good luck to you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, that concludes our public hearings for this evening. We're going to close that portion of our public meeting, and we'll just take the business meeting. Fortunately, this first sort of hybrid is a short one, so it's a way for us to get our feet wet and get back into each other's company. And we'll probably be loaded prepared for next time. We have a full docket for next time together. We have approval of the minutes of 6:28. Do we have a motion to approve or any comments or changes?
I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes. I'd also like to say, now that you're here in person, you do a very nice job.
Thank you.
That's for sure. Anyone who has to write down the things he said deserves like a medal or a hug, at least. It's just, we're very grateful, and it's reflect care, and it's not an easy game. Do we have a second? Was that a motion?
Yes, I mean,
Was that just a comment?
no, that was, I started.
All right, we have a second.
I'll second
All
that.
right, great, thank you, Mr. Lau. Motion made and seconded. All those in favor, this is just an aye vote. All those in favor say aye. Any opposed? Any no votes, abstentions, none. The ayes have it. Motion carries. Votes approved. Thank you, Gretchen, very much. Any other updates from the chair, planning director? I have none, other than we're going to try to do more of this, do it better. And I do want to say welcome to Lynn and Patricia. We have been desperately in need of, willing talent who were not able to get out of the way quickly enough and are now here with us. It's a privilege to get to do this work with others who care about the community and choose to do this work. So thank you. So, and anything from our manager, unless there are any questions.
I just have one quick comment. At the end of our last meeting, it was very late, but we had a discussion about going back into meetings, it should be hybrid, should be only have people come. And I think, I heard the planning board does something we should consider, which is maybe you've already thought of this, which is if we didn't have it tonight, but if we have a big meeting, which certainly could. To encourage people to come, maybe you recognize the people in the audience first before the web audience. Just a thought. I've seen other boards do that.
Really?
And yeah. I think
But we're just having to work first.
I think I think there's a logic to it. I think, that makes sense. Unless there's any objections, I'm happy to just, I can do that. Unless there's any objections, I'm just happy to do that. Yeah, I mean, I think that's, as long as it was orderly and balanced, and it was simply those here first, those online, immediately there.
And just in the last meeting, we talked about, it's so nice that people here, I have to encourage these people.
Yeah, it does. And I think that that's a better public hearing, it's a better public process.
I'm not saying we exclude people online, but all of them first.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. That makes a lot of sense. Anybody else, any thoughts or anything you want to add?
And another question. I think a lot of us got a little gift packet from a law firm in Boston this week. Is there anything we have to do to coordinate our attack and siege of this group? Or
It's a service requirement that it be served upon every member, and only in our capacity as members of a volunteer appointed per board. We have no duty to respond individually. We turn this over to our city solicitor, we're getting Copeland and Page. They respond and address it on our behalf.
Okay.
I've said this, I've been on this board, I've had the privilege of being on this board, I know I've said this before, for many years, so it's 20. And I'll never forget the first time I was, and as a lawyer, right, and I think we were approved, and now we have one more. And Tricia is wise enough to be an artist. But for those of us who are attorneys, we're probably more, adept at like this sort of thing and receiving service process. I'll never forget getting a flurry of calls as the only at the time attorney on the board. Or panicked members of the zoning board. My wife says I have to drop this. She's worried we might have to. We just got sued. I didn't know that was part of the game. And I said, that's not really what's happening. My name's all over this. And can I put my wife on? And they did. And I felt so bad for that gentleman who was pretty nameless, but we all know it's the label. That's the appeal process.
Okay.
They'll take care of it.
will they
will
let us
advise
know
us.
where it stands?
Yeah, we will get advice.
Get an update.
Okay, the office usually coordinates with KP Law as the chair mentioned.
Yeah.
We circle back, we advise the board, let you know the progress of litigation.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. All right, good question. Hopefully that's not what happened.
I just didn't know if I had to get insurance, call a couple of guys down in Southie.
Yeah, it's an unenviable part of the game, but it happens rarely, but it's part of the process. It happens. We've got counsel, so that's who takes the lead. Anything else before we adjourn? We have a motion. So moved. Seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Motion carries. Meeting's adjourned. Thank you, guys. Good drawing off you for